Hello, I'm Carrie Ann Nadeau, founder of ODN, and we're back with Profiles in Risk, a podcast that enlightens the world of risk around you. Each episode, we explore insurance through the stories and experiences of the most influential thought leaders, product developers, and entrepreneurs modernizing the insurance industry. You can find more content at odnsure.com/thegolfcourse or show notes on insnerds.com. Enjoy this episode. So welcome back to Profiles in Risk. This is Carrie Ann Nadeau. Tuning in today, we have a very special podcast. I'll actually let my guest introduce himself today.
Yeah, my name is Brandon Schuh, and we're doing a little dual podcasting here. My podcast is Risk Radio, and broadcasting from Minneapolis, or Minnetonka, more accurately, Minnesota. And excited to, be doing this podcast with Carrie.
Yeah, so essentially we're co-branding this podcast. We're going to push it out on both mediums, make sure both audiences hear it. And essentially Brandon and I were chatting about both being podcast hosts and how we're leveraging both this platform and social media in order to build brand, build content, build awareness, build engagement, build community, all of these wonderful things. And I figured the conversation was so good, let's record it and help the broader industry really understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how they can be helpful, why it's important, all that fun stuff. So I think,
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't people want to listen to two people talking about insurance podcasts? So.
It's so meta, right? Like
right.
A podcast within a podcast. We've gone into some weird ether space of podcasting.
Like the fourth wall or the sixth dimension or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to start. I would love to know how you started, when you started your podcast. Like, what was the original inspiration behind Risk Radio?
Yeah, so good question. So I have a fairly embedded background in risk management. I was a risk manager for almost 9 years at a ladder manufacturer. So as you can imagine, people do stupid things on ladders. They fall off them. They do a variety of things that you probably never want to know about. So I did that for a long time, and I managed the product liability and the insurance and everything else. And then after about 9 years of doing that, I joined the brokerage side. So I've been in the brokerage business now for about 6 years. And just after being on both of those kind of sides of risk, I just saw a lot of people. I met a lot of people. I started getting pretty involved with, those disrupting risk and those using technology to benefit risk management. And I'm like, well, I know a lot of people, I see a lot of things. Why not, broadcast this to the world of risk management and see what sort of response I get?
So it's really like putting those conversations out to the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's, and then I'm a big podcast listener, and I was actually interested in listening to some risk related content. And there's not that much out there, or at least wasn't at the time that I started looking. Your podcast is one of the few that I found. I mean, there's, Marsh has like a Insurance 101 podcast, but it's not really content driven where non-industry people would be interested in it. It's very topic and coverage driven and that sort of thing. So I just thought there was a lot of opportunity to bring people and ideas and some thought leadership to the insurance space.
Yeah, I think that's a great reason to start. For me, it was actually Nick Lamparelli, who's the original host of Profiles in Risk. He reached out to me and he was like, I would love to interview you for a podcast. We did it. And he was like, you have a really great podcasting voice. And I don't know what that means. I don't know. It wasn't trained or anything like that. But that sort of compliment made me think, this is something that I could do. So just, getting to know Nick and getting to know how he used the podcast and why it was important to him I was like, wow, I could jump into that, and timing and good luck happened where there was an opportunity for me to do that and build off of the platform that he's already established. So I had a really sort of lucky grab in coming in sort of midway through there being an audience already in place. How did you build audience? Like, what was you started off with 0 followers, or like follower of mom, right? Follower
Yeah,
of one.
exactly. Yeah, my parents are big listeners. No, I mean, we're still very early on in the process. We've recorded a fair number of them, but we're still very early on in the process. But I have I guess, a fairly good network just based on what I've done the last 13, 14 years, uh, and it kind of started there, I guess, and matriculated. I don't know if that's a word, outwards. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
it grew from there.
I
Yeah.
mean, it seems to me like the industry itself is fairly hungry for content, like most industries are. So I think when people start engaging in different social mediums, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever, I do think that there's a propensity for kind of an exponential increase in those that get excited about it.
Yeah. So we use LinkedIn. Do you use a number of different social platforms?
LinkedIn is by far the most successful. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, how I define success, I'd love to know how you define success. For me, I define it based on the traditional measures of comments, shares, likes, but also I get folks who reach out, right? Who are maybe not comfortable putting their name on the post or affiliated to the post, but who reach out to me in private message and say, I really liked what you're doing here. I do this. Like, let's keep in touch or connect based on listening to the podcast. Do you use other metrics, or are those some of what you use to evaluate sort of like what's working?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I, I think from a social medium standpoint or social media standpoint, LinkedIn is kind of interesting because in general, people are less engaging than
Hmm.
they are on Facebook or Twitter or anything else, just because it's their career, it's their job, and I think they're less uh, risk taking when it comes to putting their name out there or putting opinion out there in general. I don't know
Hmm.
if that's not universally true, but
So you're
seems to
kind of
be.
touching on like why people don't comment on LinkedIn posts. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And why, 100 likes on a LinkedIn post is a lot, right? But
right.
on a Facebook post where you have 500 friends, you might have 500 likes in an instant, right? Where that just doesn't happen on LinkedIn.
Right. Yeah.
But you still have good penetration and good uh, viewership where you just don't have that engagement.
I feel like it would be really great. Like I want to hear some strategies about how you've gotten people to comment, share, hopefully this podcast inspires some people to
Sure.
put a comment on a LinkedIn post. I feel like it's so inauthentic when I'm like, what do you think? Or I'm like sort of cheesy in the copy about I need you guys to engage because I need that
Right.
feedback. I need to know if what I'm doing is good, if what I'm saying is resonating, or if I'm just a crazy lady like shouting into the ether. How have you found that it's like super? Have you found like maybe one post that did really really well that you've been able to sort of learn from and build from, or are you thinking like, oh, you're still learning? Are there early things you could point to that you think work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning, but I think in general, the LinkedIn community gets engaged when it's it's like an easy layup. It's, here's what happened, congratulations type of, like, that's the response. And
Mm-hmm.
when it's easy like that, uh, I think that's when you get the most success. So, trying to direct your copy or your messaging towards, whether it's, you know, uh, creativity, empathy, community, but anything where somebody can easily engage and say, "Wow, that's really cool, congratulations," or, "I want to
Mm-hmm.
be a part of that." I think that's where you get the most success. When you
Yeah.
get in the copy or in the post, when you try to get um, obviously political but controversial, I think that's when you start to feel a little resistance in
So
terms of
true.
the
I had a
engagement.
I had a post recently where I said, like, let's make auto profitable again. And I thought, oh, that's funny. It's kind of pithy based on Make America Great Again. Like, it's sort
Right.
of a funny, oh, I failed miserably. It was one of the
Yeah.
worst performing. I just broke all of those rules. I was political and controversial
Right.
all in one
Right.
statement. It was a definite failure, but a learning experience. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um,
And then obviously, photos and everything else drive the algorithm. But um, to me, there's really something where people can get engaged and be
mhm,
complimentary of something that you've done. I mean, you look at some of the LinkedIn posts out there that go viral, and on the surface, you're like, how have 50,000 people like this post?
mhm.
It's so basic, but it's like, that's what people can engage in because they feel comfortable putting themselves out there.
Yeah, where do you think the discomfort comes from? Because the way that folks use, obviously, the way that we use Facebook, they post pictures of their family, of their children. On LinkedIn, there's a reserve. And I wonder, I suppose that it's something to do with the corporate culture around not stepping out of line. Do you think that's the reason?
Yeah, I think that's the reason. I think it's ironic because people get we have all these trolls and people feel free to be really sinister and critical on a lot of social mediums, but for some reason LinkedIn in general, I mean, and there are outliers obviously,
Hmm.
has stopped people from having that sort of behavior. I guess that's a good thing, but it
Yeah,
also prohibits a lot of engagement too. So
that's right. Like, I want someone when I post a post on LinkedIn to say, here's the sentence that I thought was relevant to me. Here's what was interesting. Can I get more of
right,
that content? Right? Like, give me feedback, engage in a way where we can have a constructive conversation and maybe I can be useful or vice versa. Right. Uh,
right.
and I guess I don't really worry about trolls on LinkedIn. I haven't bumped into a whole ton of trolls, but maybe that's just, I haven't put myself into out there enough.
Yeah, I don't think they're too ubiquitous at this point. I think it's people people are probably just very conscious of their
Hmm.
job and their career, and putting themselves out there, might for whatever reason make them think that it's going to jeopardize something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either where that message is coming from or that concern originates. Because certainly, I was telling you, I was at a conference for agents and brokers, and the way that they're using social media is definitely different because they're, on the front lines of communicating with a consumer and meeting consumers where they're at. Selling insurance to millennials, you better be on pretty much every form of social media: Snapchat, LinkedIn,
Right.
Twitter, Instagram. And I guess I'm on most of those platforms, but I certainly don't use them professionally in the same way that I use LinkedIn. But the folks, I thought a really good story I just thought to share was this gentleman, broker for small business insurance. He went out, sold a bunch of insurance in his community. He would write about 20 policies a month. I forget what the dollar value on that was, but approximately 20 policies of small business insurance, business owners policies a month. He went into a couple customers that he already had and said, let me do a little video, put up maybe $1,000 to edit a nice video, put it on local media, local television station saying, hey, this pizzeria is the most fantastic pizza I've eaten in all of small town America. Come into this Main Street business, right? The next month, nothing. The next month out of that, nothing. The third month, he had pretty much every business on that street saying, wow, we saw the impact of that value added service you added to your one customer, this one pizza place on the block. He was booking 80 policies a month instead of 10, 20 policies a month. So there you can see the ROI so quickly of putting more content out into the world in order to give value before getting value. And that it works on the agent broker side. What I'm trying to figure out is how does it work on the carrier side? What is it that motivates carriers that says, look, if we put a little bit more of ourselves out there, what we'll get out of the experience will be triple, quadruple fold. Like, maybe it's one thing I've thought about is maybe it's access to technologists, right? You're always looking for the newest, coolest innovation. Well, we're putting the word out on social that we're there so that we're found. And maybe a deeper engagement is the role of a chief innovation officer at one of these insurance carriers to say, hey, let's jump on social and try to network into the industry, get references, start to see who's going to engage with us back. Because one of our competitors hasn't posted since 2017. I don't even know if they still exist, but that's a great way to vet out whether a business is going to be responsive as a vendor to you, whether they're going to be thoughtful, responsive, listen really well, right? Like, I wonder what it is. And I'm trying to like spitball some ideas to inspire. Maybe you have some thoughts on like how carriers can begin to see value in participating in podcasts, engaging on social media, sort of all of the social networking that's possible now.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty multifaceted question.
Yeah, let me throw you a softball. Here's an easy one.
No, I think that, I think first of all, I think that it starts kind of at the top. You talk about small business policies and homeowners policies. It's probably a much different carrier engagement level than selling, large loss sensitive programs to large Fortune 1000 companies. Uh, you know, you see commercials every day for Progressive and Nationwide and everything else, and they're very involved on the consumer level.
Right.
But you know, let's talk about like the auto space right now. You talked about it before. You're obviously involved with it. The losses there on like large fleets and trucking and that sort of thing. Now we're talking about larger customers, and the carriers are involved at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an area of the business where you don't have a lot of millennials involved, right? You have a lot of people that have been in the industry a long time, a lot of people that have done business, sold business a specific way for a long time, and it's more about kind of changing the philosophy around engaging with customers, I think, at that level.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good point, that like the value add for specific lines of business, at least when it comes to converting a sale, isn't there, right? Like if you're writing mass cap, environmental risk, environmental exposures for a coal mine or something like that, like being on social media probably isn't relevant to those sorts of lines of business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in the traditional sense, like, advertising for the product is less is less effective, because their conduit to the customer is not themselves. It's typically a broker, right, or a consultant or what have you. So the advertising directly to the consumer is a different pitch than it is for small business and personal lines, where the consumer is probably buying direct from the carrier.
Right.
So now you have this intermediary so now your customer base is the broker and the agent instead of the end user. So it becomes a different sort of dynamic. And right. I think carriers are trying to figure out the best way in today's, all of these different mediums to get to their customers, how to do it. So I think that's part of it. They're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that there's probably an opportunity to use social to sell the customer, but you just brought up another opportunity for them, which is use social networking as an opportunity to engage more brokers. Like if you use independent agents, like that's right. A fantastic opportunity for you, right?
Right. And, something that I've always thought would be a beneficial tool, and I don't know if this goes towards advertising, or maybe it's an app that needs to be discovered, but aligning brokers with the right carrier from an appetite perspective, like XYZ carrier is interested in writing this, and XYZ broker has experience in the same thing. So how do we align those two? I think that's probably where it's going from an advertising standpoint. It's trying to align people with the right appetite.
Yeah, and I see that on the sort of technologist side. So if you talk about like InsurTechs, is the example that I gave, right? What are carriers trying to find, and how do we help them find those resources? So whether they're trying to find the right broker and match themselves, or whether they're trying to find the next technology that will give them a competitive advantage in specific marketplaces. We go to a lot of conferences because it still is a very like one-to-one personal relationship building industry, if I can use that generally. But I feel like social gives us the opportunity to do the same thing we do at conferences at scale, much more efficiently, actually probably more effectively as well, right? Like
Right.
targeting, using all of the information that's out about us on the internet would be much better than walking into a happy hour at the end of a massive conference with 5,000 of randomly sorted people, right? Like I feel like if we kind of change that mentality around, conferences are great, but we can't be going to Vegas every other week to just try and find what the internet is there to help us find, right?
Right. And kind of that kind of examines the question of, what it kind of goes to the root of, what is the best methodology towards new business development?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, on a larger scale, is it networking, going to a conference,
Mm-hmm.
or is it direct? I've always been, I've always played in a niche, right? Product liability is my background. It's always been kind of my niche. So I've always used a very tactical approach, going right to, the buyer, whether that's on LinkedIn or whatever it is, through direct messaging and different things,
Right.
being as direct as possible and talking specifically about the value that you can add toward the business. So I think that it's probably some sort of hybrid where
Mm-hmm.
both can come into play, but you know, that's what we're all trying to figure out, I think.
Yeah. And why this podcast in particular, this one is so useful because I feel like we're bouncing some good ideas back and forth. A lot of them aren't going to work. A lot of what
Right.
we're going to do is going to fail. It's going to be my make auto great again try failure, right? So, yeah, I think we don't have the Bible on this, but we're at least out there trying to test out some ideas and figure out, see what sticks to the wall.
Right. Absolutely. What are you looking at in terms of the future of your podcast? Where do you see it going? I know that you've
Yeah.
dug deep into technology, but do you have your eyes on some other directions, or are you kind of going to keep going down that route?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like any entrepreneur, we're, putting something into the market, seeing if the market needs it, adapting based on the feedback we get, being humble and learning about what information they need so that we can help be the supplier of that information. So you mentioned we focus on auto. My company ODN focuses on auto, telematics, and sort of the future of IoT, machine learning, AI, all those fun buzzwords. So in coming to the podcast and becoming a host of it, want to use this platform to do is to actually drive change. And to do that, I think we need to feature people who are driving change, who are at the wheel, right? I don't use the word disrupt because I think it's too aggressive. I don't want to disrupt the insurance industry. I want to accelerate its growth. I feel like insurance, the reason why technology is slow to adopt is in part because we've been growing like steadily on a linear progression, right? We're still earning a lot of money in this industry. No one's not flush for cash yet, but why is that like okay? Why is that the status quo is what we all feel comfortable with continuing? The goals from 2018 shouldn't be the goals for 2019. We want to see exponential growth. And to do that, I think just like having yeast in a bowl, you need to add sugar, right? You need to add some new
I
component,
like that.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise it's just, it's still yeast, you're at no loss. Like, but if you recognize there's an opportunity to make bread, both literally and in the figuratively in the means of cash, right? Like if you see there's an opportunity to make bread with that yeast, why aren't you looking for the sugar, right? Like, so we're trying to help folks both identify what those drivers are, what they need to put into the mix, test, see what works, and see if it makes them more profitable, finds them more customers, lowers their operational costs, improves their operational ratios and loss ratios simultaneously. Like, we're trying to find all of those things for the carriers so that they can have a buffet of, this makes sense for me right now in this moment, given the priorities, given the book of business that I have, given the leadership at the helm and their interests in advancing specific technologies. So while I have a background in auto, I think auto is one of those spaces that's going to absolutely change. The revolution in the amount of technology in this space and the pace at which auto manufacturers in particular are aggressively moving towards autonomous, connected, IoT enabled vehicles. The insurance industry feels a sense of urgency to find that sugar in that case, to figure out what it is that they need to do to increase profitability, maintain profitability, whatever their goal is, but not to get left behind.
Right.
Auto is that for us.
You are a change accelerator, not a disruptor.
That should be the goal, right? Like,
right.
Insurance been around forever. I'm not going to come in on Tuesday and be like, all right, we don't need insurance anymore. Flip the table, right?
Yeah. But like you said, the auto space is going to be even more disrupted over the next 5-10 years. I actually talked to Gene Munster on my podcast yesterday, he was a former Piper Jaffray tech analyst, and now he has a venture capital fund called Loop Ventures, and it's kind of almost like a research futurist enabled VC to some extent. So I was asking him about the future of transportation, which they have a manifesto that talks about the future of transportation. And one of the things that he said was that he doesn't think in the next X amount of years, whether that's 10 or 20 years, he doesn't think people are going to be allowed to drive. He thinks that, the autonomous vehicles and the technology will be at a point where it is much less safe for people to drive than for the machines to drive. And to me, that's a huge disruption, obviously, to the insurance space. So how do you think that disrupts your company?
Well, luckily we're positioned to survive the transition to autonomous vehicles and actually enable a lot of those technologies to operate safely and prevent crashes, save lives. So what our technology does is risk rate all of the roads so that carriers and auto manufacturers and cities can all simultaneously allocate resources to those areas in advance of putting an autonomous vehicle on those roads. The sensors know, hey, I'm in a place that's unsafe, or I'm an insurance carrier and I insure a driver that's driving during snow on really unsafe roads. The risk exposure that they may be exposed to or expose others to is higher. So we need to think about pricing, offering discounts to represent the actual risk of those drivers on the road. So we'll definitely survive. I think it's going to be one of the most important things we do is actually remove a lot of the ways that we've traditionally measured auto insurance risk is by removing the individual from the equation, from the actuarial model, from the pricing model, from the underwriting process. Say, we no longer care about who you are. We care about where you are, because that is vastly more important at the end of the day than your FICO credit score. Now, how we do that, right? I feel like that's a disruptive thing, but how we do that is to start by integrating and then say, all right, you see a lift. You see that this is improving the way you do business. What if you, instead of tacking it onto the end of your process, just for a second, put it as the first step of your process. Put it before you start asking your customers questions and see, can you find more customers? Can you find them faster? Can you find the ones that you want? Offer them automated quotes, offer them quotes that are priced appropriately so that you remain profitable. All that will come. Right now, since we're an earlier stage company, we're really tacking on to the end and saying, even if you put this at the absolute last step that you do is still beneficial to your business. So we'll get there. But I think what you're driving at, which I think is a really good question, is how do you have these conversations more? We have them in podcasts, right? Like, why do we have to listen to the 40th minute of a podcast to get a good nugget out of it, right? Like, could we take what we talk about in the podcast and put more of those snippets on LinkedIn as text or as audio clips? And that's what you're saying we're doing with this Profiles and Risk platform, is to say, maybe people don't want to listen to 40 minutes. Maybe people want to listen to that 2-minute nugget that we can clip out of this longer discussion that we get to eventually, but is the most important thing they need to hear over a cup of coffee, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of on the back of the minds of everybody in the industry, but you're right. It takes a while to tease out of the conversation.
It does. And I think the value I'm getting out of this conversation is that it's like, I think we're so privileged, you and I specifically, and anyone who does, and there are other podcasts out there too, but anyone else who does podcasts, to get exposed to these ideas, right? Like, now you know about something that's crazy different than any other, approach to pricing auto, that maybe you tell to somebody else who never watched a podcast, who never heard of podcasts or used podcasts, right? Like, we have sort of this insider access that's meaningful, in terms of my own ability to learn and grow my own company, but also my ability to network to other people. I feel like a really important fulcrum sort of node in a network, simply because I am participating in the podcast, not just listening to them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like, I hate to reuse a term that's overused, but as soon as you become a thought leader
Yeah.
in something, and that goes beyond, being a professional in that sector, it's, talking about it and thinking about it, then, I think you become a source of information for people to go to and tap into. So.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about this podcast is, frankly, there's a lot of land to grab, right? Like, there can coexist multiple podcasts that talk about slightly different iterations of a topic and reach different audiences. And there's like, not yet, at least, a competitive vibe in this space. It's like, we're all going out there just trying to help folks find and be supportive of this network, however, and through whatever means they choose to get information. Right?
Yeah. Insurance seems to be one of the, last frontiers in terms of disruption. And, I haven't been in it that long, but insurance has been the same for a long time. And just recently there's been a whole pile of money thrown in insurtech and trying to disrupt the industry, because obviously it's ripe for disruption, just because it's been the same for so long. And now there's so many companies, like yours, that are making it much more transparent and easier to figure out. And I think it's so great that all these companies are rising up and making insurance more interesting, but more economic too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the benefit, just to be like transparent and vulnerable, is that people know we exist, right? Like, it's free marketing, right? And I'm not a marketer. I'm not like going out there with a sign that twirls on the street. I'm just trying to help people know we're out there. And then also, I find a benefit of doing this podcast is when I do walk into a room, I don't want to say I'm known, but I don't have to have an initial conversation. Hi, my name is Carrie. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of ODN. Here's the basics. Like, people will come up to me and be like, I love what you're doing. I have a meaningful question to advance your thinking, or I have a meaningful opportunity for you to connect to somebody because I watch what you do and I think I can help make a connection, right? Like, that 10 minutes I used to waste, right? Like, you get 5 minutes of someone's or 10 minutes of someone's attention. Why waste it on, hi, my name is? Why not start at step 2? And that has been, great for all sorts of benefits to ODN.
Well, I think you have a really great platform, particularly since you've built a company. To me, one of the most interesting things about what you do is how you get it off the ground. And I think just from a podcast standpoint, I don't know if you've explored it that much, but it might be something interesting to talk about. Everybody's super interested in, venture capital and fundraising and how do you get the money to do this stuff. I started a sensor company that's still in its infancy, but I mean, those are questions that I have. So I'm sure that everybody would be interested in hearing about, how do I take my idea and make it,
I like it.
turn into money?
What'd be fun is if we featured, I'll get one of our investors on the phone or on the line and just have a dialogue about the stress and the difficulty and the ups and the downs that happen sometimes in the same day of being an insurtech, right? Like,
Right.
and from his perspective, he gets his monthly, investor updates about how we're doing and how profitable we are. But he sees another, if you touch base with me every 4 weeks, it's this challenge, it's this contract going slower than I expected to always. It's never going faster than I expected
Right.
to.
No.
Right? Like, and as an investor, what's his perspective on, the future of insurtech? He's invested in the future of insurtech and how to support those companies might be a really, vulnerable. I keep coming back to this word vulnerable, but maybe that's why we do this podcast, is just to say, we're not a website that's like nice and formatted and designed. We're actually people that have stories to share, and opening up about that and like being vulnerable about that, I think just humanizes the company and humanizes us in a way that like now I'm approachable in a way to
Right.
companies,
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
prospects, to people who apply. It's funny. I get people all the time apply to work with ODN who reference the podcast. Like, I listened to you on the podcast. I was really inspired. I was like, oh, expect that benefit to come with it.
Making a difference.
Yeah. Or like just helping people feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling me, right? My phone number's on my website. Go for it. Call me. But without an invitation, and I feel like this comes back around to what we were talking about with LinkedIn, right? Like, without an invitation to comment, to share, folks hesitate.
Right.
And
You got to make it really easy for them.
yeah. And if there's one like takeaway from this podcast, don't hesitate to comment and share on LinkedIn. Like,
Right.
there's nothing you're going to say short of something political, like we were talking about, political, controversial. Just give me a thumbs up. Hey, I really like that part, or this was helpful, or that I don't agree with, right? Like,
Right.
great. That's going to help me get better content for you later.
Yep. Yeah. The more people can share and comment and make it feel like a community, I mean, the more beneficial it is for everybody.
Yeah. And I don't want listeners to walk away thinking like we're self-aggrandizing, right? We're like, oh, help us get more famous. It's not that. It's actually, how do we elevate the ideas that are good, right? Like, how do we get the
Right.
crap out of the system and say, and a lot of what I say is crap, right? Like, how do I stop saying crap and start giving you what you want, giving you more nuggets that are useful? But without feedback in that system, it's hard to manage. Have you ever found that, like, have you gotten a comment like that's helped you design or an introduction maybe to an interview that you hadn't thought would be really great and ended up being fantastic?
I mean, I've had a lot of, especially in the last few weeks, a lot of beneficial direct messages
Me
that
too.
that say, you know what, I'd really like you to cover this. This is something that I haven't thought of. And particularly, I think when you're getting that information from the carrier space, it's
Mm-hmm.
really beneficial because, they're on the ground floor. They know exactly what's coming. So if they hear it, chances are that, the rest of us haven't. And it becomes kind of an emerging opportunity to talk about something that, is kind of on the minds, but not necessarily right in front of everybody.
Yeah, that would be a great, I don't know, but carriers don't really do a lot of, I mean, we talked about some corporate podcasts, but they're not as vulnerable, frankly, as a you or an I stepping into a podcasting space and saying like, we want to learn and help other people learn, right? But
Right.
you're totally right.
Particularly carriers that take more risk.
Yeah.
The traditional markets are probably less, less excited to step out and do something like this. But you start getting into the excess and surplus lines marketplace, or the Lloyd's marketplace. I mean, they're doing some really cool stuff that they're taking risk that people haven't thought of before. Mostly because
Right.
there's new companies out there that are making risk different than it used to be. I mean, you talk
Mhm.
about the sharing economy. You talk about even things like you're doing. Now we have to script policy language and forms differently than we did before because the risks are different. Even
Absolutely.
even you think about like a device like an Amazon Alexa,
Hmm.
and suddenly you could potentially combine two hazards that previously were not combinable. So you think about the classic example of your Amazon Alexa connected to the lock on your door in your house.
Right.
So now, if an intruder is outside and can access Amazon Alexa and say, "Alexa, open the door," and that intruder then causes a bodily injury to somebody inside, now you've breached kind of the coverage form of
Hmm.
a cyber liability policy
Yeah.
now into a general liability policy that includes bodily injury. So they have to think about all this stuff that nobody's thought about before. And
Yeah.
Lloyd's particularly has been on the cutting edge of that. So they do see a lot of things that the rest of us don't.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It strikes me on so many levels. We interviewed a IoT device enabled company called Habit, and they had a bunch of use cases around elder care, right? Like if grandma doesn't get out of bed, it signals emergency response to show up and make sure she's okay,
Right.
things like that. And I hadn't thought about the liability of when that system fails, right? Like you're relying on a service, maybe even provided by your insurance carrier. What happens when things go wrong?
Yeah. So now you're talking about a professional, basically like an error
Yeah.
in your professional service, or maybe you could even do like a technology policy or something like that, but you're introducing the element of bodily injury to it. So
Hmm.
there's just all of these coverages that never had to be contemplated before that
Yeah.
now they do. And
Now on the flip side of that, right? Like I'm a small business owner. I have all of the traditional business owner policy. I didn't own a car. I had to get car insurance. Why? I
that's
don't know.
ironic.
Yeah, right. It was annoying. Recently got a addendum to my insurance policy that said you're not covered if your small business has a drone. And to your point, right? Like when I got my initial policy, I don't think drones were really on the table as something that a small business or a consultant would offer as a service to their customers. So they actually issued me a policy revision. Now, it didn't affect me. Thankfully, I don't use drones, but to your exact point, they're on the cutting edge of, hey, this new technology is in the space. What does that mean for our insured? What does that mean for the people that we work with?
Right. Yeah. All sorts of every day there's new risks
Yeah,
that have to be contemplated.
I wish insurance loved themselves for that because they're the industry that like is seeing all of the really cool new technology because they have to insure it, right? So autonomous vehicles, they have like insider access to what's happening in the autonomous space because everyone's concerned about how is it going to get insured. We should really celebrate that. Like how cool is that? Why aren't like every college kid coming out of school going into insurance?
Right.
It's
Well,
like,
I think they are more and more. But
mm,
I mean, for so long, obviously, insurance was kind of demonized as being this boring
yeah.
trade. I mean, it's always been a good industry, but it's never had a lot of sex appeal.
Mm,
But now it's starting to, particularly with the insure tech stuff going on. But even beyond that, like I said, from an underwriting perspective, Lloyd's and a lot of facilities in London are doing some cool stuff around coverage um,
yeah.
that
Well,
nobody else has before.
I think that's neat, right? Like, so you've got carriers doing really cool stuff. You have small businesses or insure techs, and not all small, insure techs like trying to change the tradition, let's say. And then I think also you obviously have a lot of capital coming in, so VCs, but this is the space like where we should celebritize or at least promote what's cool, right? Like
Right.
that's what we're here for, right?
Right.
It's like, why don't we have a TV show about insurance?
Right. I was actually, I think we probably will, but one of the things that we thought might be advantageous for the podcast is doing like a weekly almost status on what's going on with risk and insurance, like this week in risk, basically, you know,
Mm-hmm.
news and updates to the industry, to carriers, to what have you, just a quick 5 minute little synopsis
I
of
love that idea.
how it's evolving on a weekly basis.
And sort of like bite-sized
Right.
snippets.
Right.
Cool. Is
Because there's
that,
a ton going on.
are you going to go do that in 2019? Is this like part of the strategy for the
Yeah,
growth
I think so.
of the?
Yeah.
Cool. One of the things that we're thinking about doing, complimentary, so come, we always have an idea that we're inclusive, so please come to, is
Okay.
we're going to do at conferences, actually curated sort of VIP dinner of 5 or 6 people, including insurtech companies, founders, people at high levels within insurtechs, investors, conference organizers, and industry expert or industry folks. So like executive level folks from the carriers and the brokers. The reason I want to do this is because I think the conferences have had gotten so big that you can't actually have a meaningful conversation like we're having here. That there's all these apps to have 15-minute conversations, and yeah, those are great for introductions, but they're not good for pushing our thinking and deepening our understanding about subjects that might be a little complicated. So what I'm hoping to do is actually video record them. If you've ever seen, Chelsea Handler had this great series on Netflix that was so well done. It was, I mean, she's a comedian, so it had a different vibe to it, but food and drinks and laughter and fun, and just have folks have a great conversation about the content of the conference, what stuck with them, what they disagreed with, what they agreed with, what they're looking forward to the next day, and actually use that for the conference promotional materials, right? Like, okay, you're at this conference. What's the bite-sized bit that you need to know at the end of day 1? What's the bite-sized bit you need to know at the end of day 2? And then create content from that. So what I'm really focused on, same to you, is like making things a little bit more bite-sized in the form of video. So putting out 1 to 2 minute little clips from the longer series all year round that says this happened at Diggin. That's why it's important to go to Diggin. Or this happened at InsurTech Connect. Here's this little, clip that says what was important and why you should go next year. And what we're hoping to do is get conferences to really buy into the idea that like their essence is aligned with that. And it's not like, what I really hate is when people ask to like me to pay for them to be there or think that I'm asking them for money. I'm just asking you to bring your knowledge and expertise to the table, literally, to share and to build deeper understanding, deeper relationships. Because I really think these conferences need more of that.
Yeah, it's hard to digest everything that happens at a lot of these. I mean, there's 40 different sessions going on at once, and you never know which one to go to, and it's hard to kind of aggregate the information at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I hear that there's business deals happening at these conferences, right? Like I'm an insurtech, I'm starting out, so they're not lining up deals with me. They're not taking me out to dinner just yet. But like, why can't I create that space instead of waiting to be invited? Actually, invite folks into my ether and
Oh,
say, hey,
absolutely.
this is where you need to be at. So that's what we're going to do in 2019. We're testing it out with a couple conferences, see what we learn. So for folks listening, if you want to be in the room, let me know.
Happy to help.
Yeah, I would love for you to come. I mean, just creating more content so folks can continuously see, hear, and learn, I think is important for us for 2019.
Yeah, no, sounds good.
Cool. Well, I think with that, it's a good note to wrap on. Was there more you wanted to chat about?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
A lot. Yeah, we should
Yeah,
do this like next year, the same time, the
for
state of
sure.
the podcasts. Hopefully we'll have more folks to contribute with more podcasts emerging.
Maybe we should start offering our guests, bourbon or wine or something to really loosen it up.
I love it.
Yeah.
I just interviewed, and this isn't live yet, so it's a preview for anybody listening in. We just interviewed the head of the LPGA, president of the players and teaching coaches.
Oh,
Oh my
cool.
God. She was like, you know how I get people to golf? I tell them there's wine. You get to walk around and like swing a club at something and get a little aggression out. She's like, it's not a hard sell. I was like,
Right.
it's fair. Right. That's fair. Get a little exercise, a little booze, and a little aggression out. Deal. So maybe we should pitch the podcast in that format too. You get all of your crazy ideas out, and get a little drunk together, and have a good time.
Yeah, I like it. As one of my colleagues used to say about golf, it's just a walk in the park with a stick and a ball. So,
right. I always felt intimidated by the golf course, and as I also felt intimidated by doing a podcast. So maybe 2019 is a year of change.
Year of conquering your fears.
I am taking them on one by one, knocking them down.
All right.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. This has been both Profiles in Risk and Risk Radio. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.